At this point, I think everyone understands that Liu Che is an awesome open field commander in Rise of Kingdoms. So the question then becomes, should he be the primary commander or should he be the secondary commander? So stick around in this video for a reminder of who the best pairings are and if Liu Che should be the primary or the secondary. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming, and I really wanted to answer this question of who should be the primary commander, Liu Che or somebody else when you use him in the open field. And in case you missed my other videos, we learned several important things about Liu Che. First of all, we learned that the Sargon Liu Che combo is busted. And we tried it in that order, Sargon as the primary. But should he be the primary? Is it possible that Liu Che would do better if he was the primary? Now, in order to really unpack that, we've got to do some testing. But the reason this combo works in the first place is because of Liu Che's expertise skill, giving him extra normal attacks. You see, Sargon is going to buff himself, and when he buffs himself, doing 500 damage factor every second for the next 5 seconds with his normal attacks, getting an extra normal attack means an extra 500 damage factor, which was really nutty. So we know that pairing these two together works really great. Also, by the way, there's really good synergy with this skill over here. So if you're going to buy into that idea of Sargon and Liu Che being a great combo, we got to answer the question of who's going to be the primary. We're going to go to do some testing to do that. But before I talk about how we did that and what the result was, I do want to mention that a lot of people don't have Sargon. And so they're going to be looking at this going, what about the Scipio with Liu Che combo? And I feel like in that case, probably Scipio should be the primary. Scipio doesn't really do anything that enhances skill damage with his talents, which is a big deal. That means Liu Che is going to get the full benefit of all of these talents. He's going to generate a lot of rage, which of course works really, really nicely. So I actually like the combination of Scipio primary with Liu Che as the secondary. And we didn't actually go and test this because, I mean, bro, this would have been like hours of additional testing to go and sort that out. So what we're going to get a look at today is that #1 combo. So I'll say that it is possible that Liu Che should be the primary and Scipio should be the secondary. However, I really like Scipio as the primary for the damage mitigation and also to apply the health reduction on the enemy faster, so that then all the other commanders that are hitting the same thing as you are going to get the benefit of that sooner, particularly all the commanders in your murder ball. So there's a lot of justification that you can make for Scipio Prime being the primary that would not be reflected in the test results. So let's talk about the talent builds that we tested. For the Liu Che primary, the talent build that we tested is this one here. Now, this is a little bit weird looking, and there are several variations you could take on this. It all kind of depends on your philosophy of what you want, and I will explain that. This particular build is going for all of the talents that I think are critical from the attack tree, and this is what makes the build work. This talent over here, Fight to the Death, is actually nuts. It's very, very, very good. This is one of the best talents in the entire tree. 6% more damage dealt at the cost of 3% more damage taken. In addition, Martial Mastery is very good in this context of smite damage, increasing your normal attack damage by 6%, but decreasing your active skill damage dealt by 3%. And lastly, we take Effortless, which is going to, I think, make the duel results look a little bit better than they would look in most open field situations. Now, from here, we went in and we took a bunch of points in the infantry tree, and you may notice we didn't finish out elite soldiers, which at first seems really weird until you realize that each talent point over here is giving you 2% of health, whereas each talent point over here is giving you 1.5% total stats. And by the way, that's split across attack and defense, which you don't want as much anyways. So, yeah, no, I mean, you'd rather have the points over here. Now, often I have run this build in a slightly different way, and I can show that to you. The way that you might run this build, if you prefer, is to go for a little bit more march speed instead of the march speed manipulation. So the alternate build that you might consider for the open field is to max hold the line, and then max strong of body, to get the march speed over here, and to get all the stats over here, and over here, and just go all in on these stats. That leaves you one talent point that you might drop like over here, okay? As an example. So there's a bunch of different ways you can run this build, depending on how much you want these final stats and how much you want the march speed manipulation of the enemy versus boosting your own march speed. But for the purpose of this test, here is the talent build that we used on the Liu Che. Now for the Sargon, we used an open field build, and there are several variations of this that you could do, and we'll talk about this very briefly. But for the test, we used this talent build. This is an infantry-based talent build. You know that I generally prefer a speed-based build that looks more like this. I really value march speed very highly, and in this instance, although Clarity is buffing skill damage and Liu Che doesn't do skill damage, I still think it's a pretty solid build. But there's sort of pros and cons to each of these builds. For example, if you're doing extra normal attacks, you have extra chances to slow your target, which is pretty good. So there's definitely pros and cons to each of these builds. But for the purpose of the test, this is the build that we used. And of course, we're looking to see, is there a big difference between using Sargon as the primary or Liu Che as the primary? So in order to answer that question, of course, we went to an Ark of Osiris practice match. We used the same token buff. We took off our city skins. We evened everything up stat-wise, and then we duked it out. So let me talk about exactly the gauntlet that we ran. A big thank you again to Fluffy Pony for taking the time to do this testing so that we can share these results with everyone. Let's get a look at those results. The first thing we put into this gauntlet is a Boudica Prime Zhuge Liang. Now, in order to do this testing, we actually put a Horn of Fury on each commander that was the primary, but no other equipment. So let me explain that again really quickly. In order to try to get a better sense of how they would perform, you generally want to use equipment. But with iconics and, crits and not crits and all this stuff with gear, it's difficult to get perfectly matching gear for all these tests. So what we did is we just put a Horn of Fury on every one of the commanders that was being used as the primary. That way we could sort of compare, okay, like with the sort of rage generation they would expect to get from the Horn of Fury, how does this work out? And that is important to mention. So we've got Boudica Prime with Zhuge Liang battling into Liu Che, Sargon. And Liu Che with Sargon is slapping these archers. Big wins, okay? 30,800 to 22,300. We did it again. 30,000 to 22,000. We did it again. 30,500 to 21,200. So the Liu Che Sargon combo is shredding archers, which is actually kind of crazy. But we need to run it the other way. What happens with Sargon primary, Liu Che secondary? Well, here, we're still getting great results. 31,100 to 20,680. But then, boom, a loss. Sargon Liu Che loses 26,500 to 28,000. This is the only loss they took against archers the entire time, was using Sargon with Liu Che. Then we ran it again, 29,000 to 22,700. This is a win again for the Sargon Liu Che combo. So if we get a look at the average of these results, and don't worry, we have more testing to talk about, but we ran these 3 trials, once with, 3 times with Liu Che as the primary, 3 times as Sargon as the primary. This results in a Sev wound difference favoring using Liu Che primary by an average of about 3,000. So in other words, you would expect to improve your result by about 3,000 Sev wounds if you use Liu Che as the primary instead of Sargon as the primary. Of course, this is still a pretty small sample size, and we wanted to test other troop types, so we are going to mix things up. In fact, the way that we're going to mix things up is by running with cavalry and also running an infantry combo up against the Sargon Liu Che and then Liu Che Sargon gauntlet. Now, in order to do this, we wanted to bring really powerful commanders. So we used Huo with Nevsky and Sargon with Scipio. But this also meant we needed to remember to rest the Huo combo for 30 seconds before using it to fight. That way his sort of skills all are charged up, ready for the fight. So I'm going to jump around in the reports, and that's why we're jumping around. So I'll talk now about the Sargon Scipio results, then we'll go back to the Huo and Nevsky results. And it is important to mention that I believe Fluffy is Germany, and I am using Greece. So the thing that's crazy about that is that I have the special unit, and I have the extra stats. So for me to be losing with extra stats and a special unit is a big deal. It's actually a pretty big deal. So here is the Liu Che Sargon combo, 33,500 to 22,200. So Liu Che Sargon wins. Okay, then we do it again, 27,100 to 25,500. This was a much closer result. Then we did it again, 31,000 to 24,800, almost 24,900. So Liu Che Sargon is beating Sargon with Scipio by a pretty healthy margin. Now you could make arguments here that, oh, well, if you use the Scipio primary, you'll get the health reduction applied sooner. Like there's a lot that we could talk about with how you approach this. But let's look at the opposite, which is that we take Sargon as the primary and we use Liu Che as the secondary. So in that case, it was 26,700 to 23,000, a very narrow victory for the Sargon primary. We ran it again, and it's 23,300 to 25,300. Sargon with Liu Che loses. You're seeing the pattern here that the Sargon primary is not performing as well. Then we ran it again, and we got the following result, 27,000 to 23,700. So a narrow victory, but Sargon Liu Che was the winner. So in the cumulative result here, we're looking at an average of 4,873 Sev wounds better if you use Liu Che as the primary. In other words, Liu Che primary is doing better yet again than the Sargon primary, and this time it's almost a 5,000 Sev wound margin, which is a pretty big deal. But we're not done yet, because now we got to double back and we need to look at all these Huo results. So let me jump back to the first Huo result. All right, let's kick things off with Huo Nevsky against Liu Che Sargon, so Liu Che primary. In this case, now the cavalry are winning. And the cavalry are winning here because, I mean, Huo Nevsky just is all single target damage. It's completely cracked. Whereas Liu Che is doing some area of effect damage. So for the people who are like, bro, Chisgule, you recommended Huo, but, you know, is he still amazing? I'm like, yeah, dude, he's really good. Everybody needs to chill. When you put these two commanders together, they're gonna win duels, obviously. And here are the results, okay? 27,700 to 28,000. A narrow victory for the Huo with Nevsky. This is cavalry beating infantry, which is kind of a big deal. We go to the next report, and it's 27,800 to 28,000, a narrow victory for Huo Nevsky. And we did it again, 26,600 to 29,000, a wider margin of victory, but still pretty narrow. From here, now we use Sargon as the primary, 25,000 to 30,500. We did it again, 26,900 to 27,500. And we did it again, 26,100 to 28,600. So this brought us an average of 2,000 Sev wound improvement if we use the Liu Che as the primary. So the overall average of how much you would improve your result by across all these different troop types, all these tests we did, if you use Liu Che as the primary instead of Sargon, was about 3,304 Sev wounds of improvement. So to answer the question, whether or not Liu Che is better as the primary or secondary, according to these duel results, he's better as the primary. And one other benefit of using Liu Che as the primary is that when we refresh ourselves on what his skills actually do, remember he is doing area of effect damage on his active skill. And that active skill is reducing the march speed of enemies. So troops hit by this skill have their march speed reduced by 40% for 3 seconds. That seems really good. So getting this to fire off sooner not only seems good, but also seems to be getting a better result anyways when using Liu Che as the primary. So I personally plan to use Liu Che with Sargon as the secondary. Then I'll use Guan Yu and probably pair with probably Honda Tadakatsu for now. And then I use Trajan with Skippy Prime. But most people will just use no Trajan, and they'll just use Guan Yu with Skippy Prime as the secondary, and they probably call it a day. Of course, there is still one alternative that we're going to have to test, and that question is, hey, what about Gorgo, who's not yet in game, but was teased? Is she going to be the correct open field pair for Liu Che? Well, let me tell you something. We're going to find out as soon as Gorgo lands in the game. We're going to start to test her in a garrison capacity and also, I would hope, in an open field capacity as well. So if you want to see all that stuff when it happens, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss that crazy live stream. Of course, if you want to see when we did Liu Che open field testing, looking at all kinds of combos like Liu Che and Alex and Martel and Liu Che and so on, card will be in the end screen for that live stream with all the testing. Alternatively, if you just want the summary of the results, card will be in the end screen for that as well. I hope you'll check out those videos. And thanks again for subscribing to the channel. Until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.